probably many of us will keep our home email address constant for, for many, many years.
One, two, three, four.
A warm welcome to Alan Morahan, the Chief Commercial Officer for Punter Southall. Thanks very much for joining us today, Alan. Really appreciate it. If I may, I'm going to do a little bit of an intro and then really make this about a few questions I've got. But we chatted a week or so ago, actually, it was quite recently, and I was fascinated to understand a bit about some of the activity of you personally in your career through Punter Southall. But I wondered whether, and some initiatives, which we're going to come on to in a minute, but I wanted initially, if you could, you were sort of explaining how Punter Southall as a business had evolved and your career, a long and illustrious, successful career with the business. If you could give us firstly just a bit of a scene setter around the business and you within it, because I think that's quite interesting in terms of where it leads, if that's okay.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Punter Southall as a group is a very, very interesting place. So it started 30 plus years ago with a few people that set up an actuarial practice, did so very successfully, and through the process of dealing with clients, came to the realization that there were other services that they could bring to those clients. And in fact, those clients were almost asking of those services. And so the business originally grew just by sort of kind of natural progression of offering additional services such as, pension admin services, institutional fund management, private client wealth management, etc. They then started to grow the business even more through acquisitions. And I joined Punter Southall about 18 years ago as a result of the business that I was then in at the time as a director of a business called Opus Consulting, and we were bought by Punter Southall. And I've watched that business continue to grow over those years. We've subsequently gone through a period of now sort of realizing some of the value of those businesses. So those businesses have been sold off, or some of those businesses have been sold off. So, for example, what is now XPS, a big chunk of that was the Punter Southall actuarial and admin business that was sold to Affinity, and XPS came out of those two names. So, yeah, a very, very interesting entrepreneurial, exciting group to have been part of.
And it's interesting because when we chatted through it, there was obviously a common theme there that the business had reacted to demand and changed and acquired and evolved based against the things that were changing the market. And one of the things we touched on, and I think you're particularly well known around, of course, because of this National Pension Tracing Day, which has just gone past. Otherwise, it's a shame we couldn't have got slightly ahead of that 29th of October for those of you that didn't get involved with it, but. It's been amazing how that's really been, welcomed, definitely, embraced, should we say, by the industry, and really interesting to hear when we were chatting around, the mindset and ethic behind that. I wonder if you could tell us a bit more, because what made you think about this? What was the drive behind trying to get some attention on that topic when you first embarked? I know things have moved on a lot since, and we'll talk about that too. But where did it start?
Well, it started as a result of a business proposition that we already had within Punter Southall. So we have a proposition that we deliver to our clients called Aspire to Retire. And Aspire to Retire is an education and engagement service particularly aimed at the over 50s, because we know that people get to the point of retirement and they really don't understand what they're going into and what they need to do about it. We will have all heard, within our industry, people saying, I wish I'd have understood this far enough in advance. I could have done things differently, etc. So we created this proposition, Aspire to Retire, a few years ago, and we run quarterly campaigns on all sorts of different things relating to it. And in early 2021, one of my colleagues who was working on the Aspire to Retire proposition came to me, having seen an article in the Sunday Times about lost and forgotten pensions. And she said to me, look at this. There's a huge volume of lost pensions out there, I think it was determined at about 19 billion at the time. This could make a good campaign for Aspire to Retire, and I thought it was a fabulous idea, and I was fully supportive of it. And at that time, we had about 4,000 members on Aspire to Retire. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, actually, we're not going to touch the sides of the problem that sits out there with 4,000 members. I wonder whether we could create a national initiative around this. So that's where the idea came from. It went from a good idea for a small proposition within Punter Southall to actually there could be a wider application for this if we could get it right.
That's really cool that you actually did something about it. I mean, because that's one of the things that, over a long career in financial services and success, there's some things that are persistent, aren't they? Which is that sometimes change is not as quick as we all want it to be, but it needs someone to actually drive it and make it happen. So it's fabulous you actually picked the mantle up and did something about it, because, fast forwarding now, I think, you've got fabulous support from some big names. I think Hargreaves and Royal London and other, big pension providers, big active investment names in the market behind it. Who are some of the others that are involved, just for everyone's purpose, for reference, some fab connections?
Well, I mean, if I can go back to those early days, I was thinking, how do we turn this into a national initiative? And I knew that I needed to get the backing of some heavyweights, because frankly, as well known as Punter Southall might be within our world, outside of the pension industry, were not well known at all, and I just didn't think it would get the sort of impetus behind it. So I initially approached Aegon, Legal and General, Scottish Widows, and Standard Life, and off the back of one pitch, they were 100% behind me. They just loved the idea of it. I particularly, and it remains this, I particularly pitched it as a CSR type initiative. Punter Southall were not going to offer a service that was going to generate income for the business off the back of tracing pensions. I genuinely felt and feel that people should be able to do this for themselves. So those were our initial backers. And since then, we've got Aviva, Hargreaves Lansdowne, Royal London, Smart Pension, and the People's Pension have all supported us. And so we've got supporters now, and it's made a huge amount of difference. And it's I think it's genuinely is something now. It's the third year, and we got Martin Lewis talking about it. So
that's not easy thing to do. That's got to be a good thing.
That was year one objective. It took 3 years, but we got there.
But it was a good objective. But I mean, in terms, just for the purposes, I know our podcast, this whole sense of identity thing, which is what we hook as our theme, is about the people in the industry, the businesses, and what they're doing in the industry. And these are important and interesting topics. But I have a feeling that this is, as probably more pertinent actually for end consumers. And that was your driver, and when you talked about it, that was fabulous, because I think consumers drive everything, in my opinion. They should, as they've done through Punter Southall's history and through this project. But for the purposes of those that are perhaps less than familiar with what happens on their pensions, I'm a bit of a layman, I guess, but I know the dormant asset legislation was extended around some of these topics. Does that capture pensions as a topic in relation to what happens to funds if they're not repatriated to end consumers? Can you share any sort of knowledge and expertise around that stuff?
Yeah. So in the main, the assets are just going to remain sitting with the providers or the schemes. You're right. The dormant asset scheme has now been opened up to be able to take pension assets and other assets. But it's quite restricted at the moment in terms of whether pension assets could move to the dormant asset scheme. So the situations where they could move are largely based around the death of the individual for whom those assets were, or if the contractual term of the pension has elapsed for at least 7 years, and there's
Right.
no contact. So at the
Right.
moment, those are the only situations where money could be used and moved into the dormant asset scheme.
Right.
Aside from that, the money is just sitting with the providers, and that they are making good efforts, genuine efforts to try and trace people. I remember in that initial conversation, I was speaking to someone at Standard Life, and she told me that she has kind of serious invoices going across her desk for forensic tracing services.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and the success is not as great as you might imagine. I guess GDPR, etc., makes it a little bit difficult,
Bit harder. Yeah.
to track these people down.
And despite these efforts, I know the numbers have risen as well. I think you mentioned when you first embarked on this, it's not that long ago, 19 million. I saw some other numbers. Have you got estimates now of what that's reached? It's extraordinary, isn't it?
So the article that my colleagues, Johanna, saw in 2021 related to some analysis that had been carried out in 2018, and at that point they reckoned it was about 19 billion. We, along with a couple of other organisations, sponsored the PPI, the Pension Policy Institute, to do that work again. And last year they determined it was just shy of £27 billion. And there's something like, I'll just get the figures right, there's something like 2.8 million lost or forgotten pension pots out there. I mean, it's
extraordinary, isn't it?
And actually, I think that's probably an underestimate of the actual quantum, because they're pulling data in from various sources, but it's not industry wide. So they're extrapolating to those figures and are probably underplaying it, naturally.
Yeah. And I guess auto enrollment and the fact that we've got lots of small pots. I know I'm going to get a talk, or hopefully you'll talk a little while. There was an example you cited. We'll come back to in a second, because I thought that was fascinating. But what do you think some of the challenges are behind that then? So, because I know we sort of continue to see, I've seen over many years now, efforts from various quarters to sort of move initiatives forward around this thing. Pension dashboard obviously being the big cry out one. And I think with that being delayed, this the scheme connectivity sort of compulsions even being moved back to sort of late in, is it 26? I think actually, but. What do you think some of the challenges have been around that, in terms of why has dashboard been so problematic? Is it that age-old thing, again, talking about age-old problems around data and access and all that stuff? Is it any your thoughts around that?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's absolutely that, and that better than I, with the business that you run there. But it's also, it needs to be all pensions, and many pension schemes, they're dormant, they're not active. That a lot of it was kind of paper driven for an awful long period of time. The data hasn't been kept up to date for those schemes to track down those kind of lost members. It's a really, really, really big task. And when you get a situation where on average people are moving 10 or 11 times during their lives, then you can understand how people can get disenfranchised from those pension pots.
Yeah, you can get. I mean, I haven't moved home, I'm pleased to say, for quite a long time. But I do remember the last time I did it, and I've spoken to others since, when they sort of said, it's not easy trying to let everybody know that you've interacted with it, you've moved. And I can actually, you can very easily see at a human level, can't you, how you can lose contact, which I totally understand from that side of things. And how do you see that evolving forward? Because I know, as I say, you gave me a brilliant example. I'm trying to think of some sort of media contact and someone had phoned in and where you've been trying to nurse them, I guess, along the process of wrestling with this paperwork trail and what have you. I think it might be worth sharing that one, because I thought it was quite interesting.
Well, so that came about. So that came through our website. So we established a website, nationalpensiontracingday.co.uk. So it's an open site. Again, emphasise there's no service on there that people need to pay for or anything else. That it's all on there. But we invite people to put their stories in. So if they have been successful in tracing lost pensions, and about 6 weeks or so ago, we got a story through there, which I think is absolutely classic. So a chap by the name of Kerry Hatton, he's based down in Somerset, and he told us that he had traced 6 pensions, and the quantum of those pensions was only £8,000. So it absolutely emphasises that there's all these small pots out there that people have forgotten about, but that £8,000 was a meaningful amount to him.
Meaningful, absolutely.
Enabled him to do something that he wouldn't have ordinarily or previously been able to do. And so we have had examples of people that track down 60 and 80,000 pound. But I actually loved that example of someone tracing 6 pensions worth a total of only £8,000, but it's his £8,000, and it's right that he should have it. And what was also lovely, and we've now got that story on the website, was he actually found the process not too difficult, and he said that interacting with the organisations that he had to, they were almost delighted that he had found them. And I suppose, frankly, if you're Aviva or Standard Life or whatever, you don't really want to be administering a pension pot of £1,000. It's better off your books, really. So, almost everyone's a winner on it. So I thought it was, it was very much what we set out to achieve. People of all descriptions will have lost pensions, but those people for whom £8,000 makes a meaningful difference, it's kind of warms the cockles in my heart.
No, I get that. Particularly when you've got sort of cost of living sort of crisis and everything else going on around us. That's a really meaningful amount of money for anybody, isn't it? Yeah. So particularly, and I was looking at the video. There's a little video snippet you've got on the National Pension Tracing Day.co.uk, just to give that out again, which is quite cool because it just talks about backtracking the chronology of your employment life and trying to find snippets of paper, and which is not easy. In a lot of cases, a lot of people, I'm sure, do what we've all done historically, which is to have all those bits of paper shuffled somewhere in a filing cabinet. But if you can go through the process of trying to find that stuff, then actually it doesn't have to be as complicated as perhaps some others have suggested. But do you think, from a pension dashboard perspective, I appreciate, and you said this earlier on, there's a legacy of a lot of schemes out there that have functioned, for a long period of time, in some cases hundreds of years, from what I can gather, on a relatively archaic sort of system. It's not easy to bring that up today. And is that a challenge that they're going to be able to face within the timelines that are set out on the pension dashboard and the current timetable? What are your thoughts around that?
Well, we know that it's been massively challenging thus far, and I read something from the PMI just yesterday, a report from the PMI, which seemed to demonstrate that the progress is now definitely being made, and I suppose as it's become, people have become more aware of the importance and value that we could get from pension dashboards. There's probably a little bit more emphasis being placed on getting the data right, etc. And frankly, these organisations, schemes, etc., they've got to do it. The pressure is going to be there, and you can understand also why the pensions regulator has been so keen to get sort of small schemes, etc., kind of mopped up and into master trusts, etc., because trying to regulate these kind of very small schemes with trustees probably long gone, etc., is just not efficient use of their resources. So they'll get there in the end. But when I first moved to National Pension Tracing Day, a couple of people said, "Well, pension dashboards will sort that out." Well, yeah, okay.
Slightly late, but absolutely. If you think of the intervening period, just then it'd be really. You're probably never going to know the stats, which is unfortunate, really. But in terms of bringing visibility to this, and in terms of the process people follow, I know that video is a good one. But you talked about just trying to look back on that history. Most of us do remember where we worked. I know you said you move home 10 or 11 times. It's likely you potentially move employers more often these days, perhaps, than we used to. But is it literally a matter of trying to do that, work back in your life and think where you were and contact the right people. I mean,
yeah, I think that has to be the starting point. Is map it out. So all the places you worked, have you got any pensions relating to those? So some of you may not have qualified for a pension, and that's absolutely could be the case. But I also think now with social media, there is that opportunity to even trace down old colleagues. So even if you haven't got the paperwork, you might know the Pete or Joe or
someone else would be there.
So you can contact them and say, look, I'm trying to sort of get my financial affairs in order. I can't remember whether we had a pension at X, Y, Z. Do you recall? So that's certainly one way of doing it. There is the government pension tracing service, so there's that to go to. But you do need to know you need a starting point of what you're looking for. But I think that's important. There's also the factor, and I think there'll be loads of these out there of people having contracted out through the 80s and 90s. They won't have actually felt that themselves because they continue to pay national insurance as they always did. They wouldn't have seen, they won't look at a pay slip and see that there was any difference. But some of that national insurance would have been rebated into perhaps a personal pension arrangement. And because people themselves weren't physically paying to it, there was no direct debit leaving their account, whatever. But they could easily have lost sight of that. So again, if people get a state pension forecast, the state pension forecast will normally tell them, well, I think will always tell them whether they had a period of time when they were contracted out. And as a result of being contracted out, their state pension will be reduced. And that's right. The first port of call to say, well, actually, if that's the case in your case, then
where is it?
Yeah, you need to go looking for it. And that might be more difficult in that situation, but it's got to be worth a try.
Bit of a treasure hunt with a nice pot of gold at the end of it in some way, and it's got to be worthwhile. What are pension providers doing, or probably equally, what should they be doing to keep those members engaged in the short and long term in the context of their pensions? Have you got thoughts around that?
Well, I think nowadays they do an awful lot to try and keep members engaged. I mean, obviously there's a real incentive to the providers to keep funds with them, etc. So they're all doing a lot more and are able to do a lot more than they were previously. So, I think things like email addresses, we're probably, many of us will keep our home email address constant for many, many years. We might move 3 or 4 times, but we're still retaining the same email address. So that opportunity to stay in contact is much easier. But for the pensioners from the past, that they are genuinely finding it difficult. They get gone away letters returned from Royal Mail, etc. Where do they go from then? If those letters aren't passed on by the new homeowners of those places, then it proves very, very difficult.
No, I get that. It's it makes a lot of sense. I mean, the bit for me that I really thought was fantastic was obviously I'm a massive lover of tech. I can't help myself. I love gadgets and I love new tech and all those things. But sometimes
I've certainly got that impression, Paulo. I never know that of you. Yes.
Yeah, a bit. Sometimes I think what is lost is just the practicality of whatever you're doing, and pensions and pension dashboard and the surrounding subjects. So what I thought was really fabulous was just some of the advice that's come off the site, and obviously this is all instigated by you and Punter Southall, was just a really practical ground level look. Try and think about some of the nudges you've just given us. It's not all about tech, and sadly, tech can't solve a lot of these problems. If the data doesn't exist, it doesn't exist. So I think that was for me what really resonated. That people were practically thinking, well, where do I start? Because actually, I think as a subject, it's quite alien for consumers. So I applaud you for setting the thing up, and even more so for getting the market and the industry to engage, because that's not an easy thing to do. So quite amazing. Just in sort of summing up, if it's okay. I mean, I'm not even sure whether my colleague had set this up. I always like to close these conversations out with some words of wisdom from our guests. So if you were able to look back on your younger years and give yourself a bit of advice, and not just about making sure you take a pension and keep it tracked, because we covered that one. What would it be, do you think? Any thoughts about listen back on all the experiences?
So that wasn't set up. Well, I mean, it's something I've reflected on quite a bit, and I've spoken about it on LinkedIn, etc. And I suppose one of the things I would probably have to say is to be a bit more confident about my own abilities than I have demonstrated at times. So, I suppose I would sit in that classic category of kind of suffering from imposter syndrome at times. And particularly when you move into a business like Punter Southall, I've sat in rooms with colleagues with brains the size of small planets, and I have felt cracking. What am I doing here? But gradually over time, I found that there is a reason that I'm there. I bring different skills, knowledge, different viewpoints, and I had a valued place within that board or whatever it would be, and I think it took me a while to get to that realization. And one of the other things I do within Punter Southall is I run our along with colleagues our mental health or wellbeing program that we call By Your Side. We focus on a different topic each month. And this year we focused on imposter syndrome, and we've recently surveyed people's view of the program that we've run this year, and imposter syndrome was one of the most appreciated topics that we've covered.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah. Because I think a lot of people, do almost hold themselves back because they don't know whether they're worthy enough to be in the room at that table or whatever it might be. So,
and it is so important. I think that's a fabulous one. I'm sure my colleagues will put a collage of these together at the end of the year, because we've had some really brilliant snippets. So in some cases, those sort of human pieces are as valuable as everything else. I mean, obviously my take is you're very much a consumer champion about doing the right thing around the topic that you've been so close to and an expert on, and therefore, like you say, having that mix of voices and allowing everyone to be heard is so important. So I think that's a fabulous one. Listen, thank you so much again, Alan, for agreeing to do this. I always put people on the spot. Alan Morahan, many thanks for joining our podcast.
It's brilliant. Thanks very much for inviting me, Paul. I really enjoyed it.